Nalini, we are talking about the 5 senior-most judges of the Supreme Court. They also understand, I'm sure, the gravity, the sensitivity of this issue, and therefore the reasoning. And I was witnessing some of the hearings. There was constant question and answer sessions that were also on from both sides. Tell us about what are we expecting in terms of how important this verdict is going to be, as much for Jammu and Kashmir, as much, of course, with regard to constitution and the legal angles.
Well, Pooja, no doubt about it. Very pertinent questions were raised by the bench when this entire matter was being heard. 16 days of marathon hearings before the judgment was reserved on the 5th of September. And it's taken over 3 months for the judges to deliberate and see exactly what needs to be done on this complex legal issue. In fact, if we look at the live stream, we can see that the Attorney General and the Solicitor General both are present already in the courtroom awaiting the verdict. Very relaxed body language. So they don't seem too perturbed, but the lawyers for the petitioners are also there. We don't want to speculate at what happens at this point. We're not sure as to whether or not it's going to be a unanimous verdict or a split verdict. But yes, the kind of questions that were raised by the bench during this entire time when the matter was being heard for these 16 days were extremely pertinent, and which signified the fact that the judges I beg your pardon, the judges actually understand the complexities of the constitutional issues involved. Now, of course, they directly impact Jammu and Kashmir, of course, but at the same time, what they are also going to be interpreting is not just the powers of the parliament, but also more specifically the powers of the president in concurrence with the state government as well as the constituent assembly or the legislative assembly, as the centre has said in this case, and as to whether or not this entire process was carried out in a legal constitutional manner. Okay. Like we discussed in the morning, Pooja, the centre cannot claim that what has been the result of the abrogation justifies the process in which the abrogation was done. The ends do not justify the means. So it is the means which is under the scrutiny of the senior most 5 judges of the Supreme Court. And in just a few minutes from now, it remains to be seen what they've decided.
Remember, this is going to be very important and no less historic than the decision that was announced in the Parliament by Union Home Minister Amit Shah on 5th of August 2019. A lot has changed. To many, it was unimaginable, it was unthinkable. Can a conflict that had been raging on, pushing generations specifically of residents of Kashmir into violence, into bloodshed that we had seen, can that really come to an end? There has been a significant drop in terror incidents, but this is about the legal validity of the abrogation of Article 370, of promulgating, bringing in different changes with regard to Jammu and Kashmir. But also, Nalini, as we continue to stay with the visuals on our screen right now, this is as much about the special status. If there was a special status to Jammu and Kashmir, I remember there was a question also asked, is that special status taking away fundamental rights of others? For example, of other states, because that does not exist in most parts of the country. And that is one of the reasons that the deliberation also had happened. For example, in employment, accommodation, housing, etc. So do you think this will pertain to a lot of questions that are asked with regard to autonomy, for example?
Well, Pooja, it's very important to remember that when Article 370 was introduced in the Constitution, it was introduced only as a temporary provision. In fact, the heading of the article says that these are temporary provisions that are applicable to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So the idea always was to eventually get rid of it. But the reason why it became tricky is because to revoke Article 370, the President needed the Constituent Assembly to make the recommendation first. In the absence of a Constituent Assembly, the revocation could not be done. So keeping that in mind, it was argued by the petitioners that even though Article 370 was meant to be temporary initially, but over the course of the time, it has become permanent. So this is one of the crucial questions that the Supreme Court will be dealing with as to whether or not the nature of the article itself was temporary or not. And keeping that in mind, of course, the special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir is directly impacted. Because in case, and this is a big if, Pooja, because it's very difficult to reverse a decision of this magnitude, but in case the Supreme Court actually goes ahead and decides that the manner in which this entire exercise was carried out and the presidential order was issued was in fact illegal and unconstitutional, then that will impact all of the subsequent changes or subsequent laws that the centre has also brought in. One of which is the fact that both Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh have been categorized now as union territories through the J&K Reorganization Act that was introduced in the Rajya Sabha on the very same day that this presidential order was passed. So there is going to be a slight domino effect for a lot of consequential laws also that had come in. But for that, the Supreme Court will first need to decide whether or not this was done constitutionally or against the due process of law.
And surely, these are experienced judges. They've taken everything into account. Absolutely. They have not only looked at the constitutional validity, but also the repercussions of such decisions. And for a valley that for the longest time, remember, this is not just about Kashmir Valley. This was how much this special status was actually being misused to an extent by Pakistan and its proxies to escalate conflict. All of these angles will also have to be looked at. Anisha Mathur also continues to be with us. Anisha, what are you hearing from inside the top court, because we do not see the judges seated yet? It's already about 10:45 and I can tell you everyone's tuned into India today with a bated breath, because once that hearing starts to be read out, every word, every sentence is going to be of extreme importance.
Well, yes, Pooja, everyone is waiting with bated breath for the judges to arrive. We are still waiting for the judges to assemble. But as we've been discussing, there are a lot of nuances, a lot of legal questions that the court will be taking into account today. But just to respond to one comment that you've made, the Supreme Court has categorically said that the repercussions, the political, the issues that have been raised in the valley, and more importantly, what has happened after the abrogation is something that the court is not, in fact, looking into. And this was a specific statement made by the bench during the hearing when the centre attempted to point out that there has been a very clear change in the way the terrorism, with regard to stone pelting, with regard to how safe the Jammu and Kashmir has been. The court said that is not what we are looking into. And as Nalini also pointed out, it is not about the end result. It is about whether the means were correct or not. And that is why today's verdict is a very, very significant one for Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, whether the statehood, whether it is a statehood issue, whether it is the issue of elections in the state, whether it is the issue of what happens
amid
next.
All of
we
this,
are still waiting.
Amid all of this, Anisha, as you continue to be with us from the Supreme Court premises, this is also as much about political will that had to be shown for a conflict like that in Kashmir that showed no signs of reducing, and only it was youngsters one by one losing their life. That has ended. All of this will have to be taken into consideration when this verdict is announced.